All right, so got a little bit more talking with my dad. We're going to talk today about going in a boat. So we talked about going off of the dock, but what maybe the difference would be if you go in a boat and let's say you're going to go walleye fishing. So we'll talk a little bit about what we would use for that.
Okay, say it's opening of fishing and you're going to go walleye fishing, and what a lot of people go with nowadays, it's gotten real popular, is a lead-headed jig. There's different Lindy rigs, live bait rigs, spinners and everything, but a real popular one is a jig. So a jig here, same thing with panfish. You can use any kind of bait on here. Usually early season, use a minnow or a leech. You hook a minnow in through the mouth and you come out the top of its back, depending on how big a jig you have. Or a leech, you just hook a leech on one end and leave the leech dangle. But this is a jig, you can cast it or you can vertically jig it over the side of the boat, straight down. So if, say don't have any bait, you don't want to buy a live bait, so we'll hook plastics on here. You can hook so many different kinds of plastics. I don't know if you look at these, a few different ones. Artificial minnow, artificial fish. These are supposed to look like a bigger minnow. Bright colors so they show up in the water. But here's what, say take this one, looks like a minnow. This is called a paddle tail. You hook this on. You hook it in through the nose and go about the length of however long a hook. Some jigs have long hooks. And then once again, this big jig has a little keeper there, a little bump out. And that's to hold this bait in place so it doesn't slide down. So you slide that up all the way up to the jig head. And the hook comes out. And you want that to look just like that when it's hooked up right. You don't want it to be crooked. You want it to be nice and straight. And you can use that for walleyes or northerns or bass. And you can cast that, leave it hit bottom, work it back. Just wind it in and keep it off bottom. If you're on bottom where you're going to get snagged or get in weeds, you can just cast it. And this little end here is called a paddle tail. That'll twirl in the water, attracting the fish when you're winding it in. Otherwise, this tail here is just straight and it flutters. That could be on the same jig. Tail's a little bit different. And here again is that long twister tail. That thing will twirl in the water. And that's what attracts the fish. Or a lot of people, you just vertically jig this right over the side of the boat. You can drift along, go right over the side of the boat and kind of make sure it's in contact with bottom for walleyes. Or you can anchor and just vertically jig this right over the side of the boat in any depth of water, anywhere from 5 feet to 30, 40 feet of water. Deeper water, you use a bigger jig to get down there faster.
That's what a lot of people use if they, opener, if they go like boundary waters or go in a canoe.
When you don't want to bring live bait, you can they make just hundreds of different sizes of these, colors, shapes, they're called plastics, plastic bodies. You put them on a jig.
Kind of fun to try them out. Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk about my favorite type of fishing. So let's say casting type of fishing where we want to catch like a bass, maybe in some weeds or something like that.
Okay. We'll go with the plastic worm.
That's my favorite.
And we'll call this one is called Texas rig. It's a real simple setup. We got a sliding bullet sinker. It's bullet shaped and it's got a hole going all the way through it. That's called a sliding bullet sinker. That you put on your line first. And then you tie a hook. This is called a worm hook. It's a pretty big hook, but for bass, they got a big mouth. And you need a big hook like that to hook them in their mouth, and it's big like that.
And most of them you see are probably bent, right?
Yep. I'll show you. This one is straight and it's got little barbs on there. They don't look like very big barbs, but you got to watch it because you can sure cut your fingers on them. That's to hold the worm up. Here's a different one. This is called the worm hook. And this has a bend in it. Yep. These are mainly the two different kinds. And then there's one other one this is a weighted worm hook. it's got the weight already on it. See, it's bullet shaped,
Oh.
so it comes through the weeds. It's got the little keeper on. But that one you don't have to use a bullet sinker with. You just use that jig. They all work about the same. The weight is to get them down, depending on how deep the water you're fishing in. Okay, say we're using this setup with the straight hook. Take any kind of plastic, but this is a straight plastic worm. It's kind of beat up because it's been used. But you hook this worm on right on the end, and you only go in maybe a ½ inch. See, about like that. Then you slide this worm on, and you cover your knot right up. Cover the eye of the hook and the knot. You cover it up. Then you turn that hook around. And you go back in. This is what's kind of critical. If you got to go right in the right place so that worm sits straight. And you go in just so it's coming out the other side. You feel it with your hook. And that's how it should look. If you go too far, it'll look like that. You don't want that. That'll twist your line, plus it won't look real for the fish. You'll get that once you try using it a few times. You'll get the hang of what it takes to get the worm perfectly straight. So that's about how it should look for. Now on the other hook, which actually it's really hard to find these hooks. These aren't real common. They don't. Most of them are bent. So if we're using a bent hook, okay, say this was tied onto a piece of line, you go on probably not quite so much. You go on about a ½ inch, and then what that bend is for, you work it around up over top, and that holds the worm in place. See that bend's coming out the side? Your line is tied on, the knot is covered, and then you just stick the hook in. Feel that so it comes out. You don't want to just barely stick it in, otherwise it takes too much to drive that hook through that worm and into the bass or whatever kind of fish's mouth. So you get it so it's just that it's coming out. If you come out too far, then it'll hook weeds. But so that's how it should look when it's hooked on that hook.
Perfect. Awesome. And what I like about like when Dad fishes and the stuff he uses, like everything you saw here, this could be kind of one trip to the store if you don't have this giant tackle box full of stuff. And it could, I'd say within $10 at the most, you could be set up to go, right? With if you have a fishing rod. So
you could put all that stuff in a little tackle box like this. Real easy. Worms, hooks, weights, bobbers.
So
don't need a lot of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Good deals. Okay, get out in your boat. Try a little bit of using a vertical jig with a little bit bigger than the other jig for walleye, something right out of the boat if you got people, if you're in a small boat. Or see if you can try, what rig, one did you call it, Texas or Carolina?
That's a Texas rig.
Texas rig.
Yep.
If you are casting a little bit and trying to catch some big bass. All right.